In this lecture, I'm going to be discussing the Settings menu of the content browser. In the top right corner of the content browser is the Settings button. If you click this button, you will get a menu of settings related to viewing the content in the content browser. For example, you can change the way the content in this window is displayed. By default, it is set to tiles, but you can also change it to list, which will make the items display like so. Or you can select columns, which will display additional information for each asset. The Lock Content Browser setting will be covered in the next lecture. Next, you have the option of displaying the folders in this window or not. By default, they are displayed, but if I uncheck this, only the assets will show and not the folders. And if you do show folders, you have the option to show empty folders or not. Alright, so if you right-click on a folder in the content browser, you have the option to add it to a favorites list, which is located in the sources panel. And then in the settings menu, you have the option to show or hide this favorites list. Okay, so the next setting relates to filters. So I'm going to click on this button and add a static mesh filter like I did a couple of lectures ago. And remember that by default, when you filter by a type, it will show you all assets of that type that are not only in the current folder, but all subfolders of the current folder as well. But in the settings menu, if you turn off the filter recursively setting, it will only show assets that are in the current folder. The next setting can be used to show or hide the sources panel. The next setting, Show C++ Classes, allows you to see files that contain C++ code. The next option in the menu is Show Developers Content. So sometimes you might want to experiment with things without risking messing up your game you've been working on, or you may just prefer to keep unfinished assets separate from your game until they've been completed. In these situations, you want a sandbox environment you can work in that's separate from the rest of your content, and this is what the developers folders are for. So if I click Show Developers Content, I will see this additional entry in the sources panel here labeled Developers. And if I expand that, I will see this folder here with my name on it that I can use to store my test assets. If there were multiple people working on this project, each person would have their own folder. This is so everyone's test assets are not only kept separate from the game, but also separate from each other to reduce unnecessary clutter. The next checkbox is Show Engine Content. This will allow you to see, and thus modify, the source code for the Unreal Engine itself. Even if you know how to code, I would highly recommend that you do not try modifying any of this content unless you really know what you're doing. And then the same with Show Plugin Content. Checking this will allow you to see the content used by the third-party plugins that have been added onto the Unreal Engine. For the most part, this content is just the source code for these plugins, so you're probably not ever going to have a need to access it. So you can go ahead and leave these two options unchecked. The next option is Show Localized Content. This is used when you are adapting your game to other regions and cultures. Checking this option will allow you to see these kinds of assets, such as dialogue waves for each different language used, or image files that each contain a particular currency symbol. Alright, so the next group of options concern where to look for search terms that you enter in the asset window search box. With all these unchecked, it will only look at the name of the asset itself. For example, if I type the term blueprint, the only assets that appear are those with blueprint in the name. But if I check Search Asset Class Names, I will get a lot more results because now it's returning assets that are of the type blueprint, even if that word isn't in their name. If I click on Search Asset Path, even more results will appear because now it's also returning any assets that have the word blueprint in their folder path. Search Collection Names will return assets contained in a collection with that search term. So with this setting checked, if I had a chairs collection and I type in chairs, it will bring up all the assets that belong to that collection. Alright, so the last group of options in the settings menu concern the thumbnail images of the assets. The first one is pretty straightforward. You can use it to set the size of the thumbnails to one of 5 different sizes. And I'm actually going to keep these set to large for now while I go over the next 2 options. The next option is Thumbnail Edit Mode. If I click on this, this just gives me the ability to change the perspective on the thumbnails. So when you're in thumbnail edit mode, you'll see this blue message across the bottom. And also now, when you click on a thumbnail and drag, Instead of dragging that asset, it will rotate the image of the asset within the thumbnail. So say I wanted to change the perspective of some of these to a more forward-facing view, I could do that. And as you can see, these thumbnails now have an asterisk in the lower left, indicating that these changes are unsaved. So I need to go ahead and click the Save All button and press Enter to save those changes. And then now that I'm done editing the thumbnails, I want to click Done Editing to exit thumbnail edit mode. The final option here is Real-Time Thumbnails. To show you what this is, let me go to Materials in the Starter Content folder. If we look at these water materials, we can see that there is some animation that goes along with the materials. If I uncheck Real-Time Thumbnails, I won't see the animation anymore. Keep in mind that the animation will still be there if I were to apply this material to a surface. This just turns off the preview of that animation in the thumbnail. And that will conclude the lecture on the settings menu of the content browser.